Namaste and good morning to all of you. Let's start the class with some prayers. Om Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwaraha, Guru Sakshat Parbrahma, Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Om Bhu Bhuvaswaha, Tatsavitra Varenayam, Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi, Diyo Yo Nah Prachodayat, Asto Ma Satgamya, Tamso Ma Jyotirgamya, Mrityorma Amritam Gamya. Om Sehna Bhavtu, Sehno Bhunaktu, Seviryam Karvavahi, Tejasvi Navadhitamastu, Ma Vidvishavahi. Om Shanti 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 Om. So we read Mahabharata book. So 47th chapter, Encounter in the Night. That is the title of it. The next morning, shortly after daybreak, Kunti and her sons came to their host, the Brahman, to say farewell. They found the traveling bard, last night's inflamer, already gone. When the Brahman's wife heard their guests were leaving, she begged them to wait for just an hour. She wouldn't let them go without cooking some food for the young man who had saved her family. Bhim was delighted. Kunti and her son spent that hour with the Brahman and his two children, while the wife got busy in her kitchen. The meal was ready and packed in an earthen vessel, tied in a cloth. Embracing their host, the Pandavas and their mother set out. The people of Ekchakra came out to say goodbye. Some of the women had tears in their eyes as they waved to Bhim. The Pandavas passed through the gates and walked on without looking back. It was inauspicious. Across sweeping plains with fields bright as a parrot's feathers, the wayfarer went, happy to be out of the friendly but dreary town they had lived in for so many months. They tracked the sun towards Campillia. Soon the day grew warm, and they rested in some airy woods and ate the meal the Brahman's wife had sent. When they had eaten, sleep came over them. The princes had not slept all night long, and Kunti just a few hours before dawn. They lay in the shade of a large Nayograd tree with no walls or ceiling to cage their dreams. The brothers all dreamt of a dark and bewitching face, its eyes full of faith. It was growing on evening when Yudhishthir awoke before the others, and he saw a profound rishi had joined them. With a knowing gleam in his eye, Vyasa said, "Sweet dreams, I hope, my son." Yudhishthir awakened the others. The princes prostrated themselves at Vyasa's feet, and he blessed them. The Maharishi said, "The way ahead leads straight to Kampilya, and fortune awaits you there, all of you. I see darkness lifting away from your lives. Days of joys are around the corner of time. You will soon forget the evil months you have passed through. Be of good cheer. I will see you in Kampilya." He strode off into the trees and actually seemed to vanish. Kunti and her sons made their way again towards Drupad's capital, singing among themselves, more hopeful than they had ever been since the burning of the house of Lakh. They journeyed on by day and by night, passing through virgin forests and across glimmering plains, fording gushing streams. In their mood, they were intensely sensible of the sights, sounds, and scents of the lands they went through. As if only now they headed for Campilya, they had eyes and ears for nature's lavish beauty. One night, as they walked through a forest, Arjun led the way with a rush light in his hand. The moon had risen above them, and they heard the Ganga flowing ahead. They heard other noises as well, unearthly voices and wonderful laughter. Someone was bathing in the river. As they went nearer, abruptly all the sounds ceased. Nothing stirred. They thought they must have heard animals drinking at the river. Only the breeze had made them seem like golden voices. Yudhishthir said, "My body is hot and tired. I am going to bathe." "Let's all bathe," said Bhim. "The water smells so sweet." They approached the river when suddenly a luminous chariot appeared from the trees, like a full moon. Two horses were yoked to it, and they were not of this earth. Their skins glowed in the dark, green and copper, and their manes seemed to be made of tongues of silver flame. Kunti and her sons could not be sure if those horses' hooves touched the ground. At the helm of the chariot stood the most marvelous being. He was taller than any man of the earth, woven with flowers and full of light. His hair hung to his shoulders. His dark face was keen and sharp, and his wide eyes, glittered angrily at them. For a moment he stood glowering, and behind him in the trees were other forms, dim and bright. The princes of Hastinapur fancied they were female forms. The chariot rider raised a hand and cried in his ringing voice, "You cannot approach the river. The twilight hours are only for the yakshas, gandharvas, and rakshas. We kill witless mortals who dare trespass here at this time." Arjun heard his haughty tone and cried, "Who are you to lay down laws for the river waters that are free?" "I am Angrapran, the Gandharva," said the elf, more imperiously still. "Sky rover, no one has any right over the ocean, the Himalaya or the Ganga, not by day or night or twilight." The Gandharva bristled. He cried fiercely, "Begone, mortals! I came to the river to bathe with my women. You may not approach the water until we have finished. Go peacefully before you annoy me. This one is named after me, and not merely men, but yakshas and rakshasas dare not come here. Humans, begone." Arjun laughed at him. "Your threats don't frighten us, not even at this twilight hour of your strength." With a cry of anger, the Gandharva raised his bow. It was an arc of light in his hands. Quick as light, he drew arrows from his quiver and began to shoot at them, especially at Arjun. Now Arjun too was a blur. He struck aside the immortal's fiery stream of arrows with his torch. The Gandharva paused in his archery that would have raised a small army. His arrows all lay extinguished at Arjun's feet. The dark human said, "Angrapran, your archery is very pretty and about as potent as a wave froth, but you are not of our earth, and I will show you what sort of archer I am with a weapon of the sky." The Gandharva waited, amused, confident the human's arrows would be puny. Arjun took his bow from Bhim, who had been carrying it for him. Indra's son called to his adversary across the moonlit glade, "Gandharv, I charge this arrow with the astra of Agni. It is Brihaspati's weapon, given to me by my master Drona. Let us see you stop my arrow." With a resonant mantra, Arjun shot his astra at the Gandharv. It did not travel as swiftly as a common shaft, but seemed to linger in the air as it flew at the glowing chariot. Angrapran waited with a mocking smile on his lips. Midway between Arjun and the Gandharv, the astra took fire. Angrapran cried out in amazement. His women in the trees screamed. In a sheet of flames, Arjun's Agnyastra flashed between the unworldly steeds and struck the chariot. The Rath erupted, and Angrapran was flung headlong from it. The chariot from which Angrapran got his name, Scorching Chariot, burned down. The shining horses bolted into the trees. Arjun strode up to the stunned Gandharv, seized his lustrous hair, and dragged him to Yudhishthir. Three tall, incredibly beautiful women ran out from the trees, the Gandharv's wives, their faces and bodies shimmering, their hair touched with starlight. The tallest came boldly up to the Pandavas. She said in her voice, so full of music, "Noble ones, I am Kumbhineshi. I beg you, spare my husband's life." The others remained behind her in the shadows. The princes heard their stifled sobs and saw their delicate bodies tremble. Arjun held Angrapran by his hair, and the Gandharva was still dazed. His chariot was a mound of ashes. Kumbhanasi knelt at Yudhishthir's feet. She grasped his hand in her soft palms, knowing at a glance that he would decide Angrapan's fate. Kind Kshatriya, spare my husband, she sobbed. Yudhishthir turned to Arjun, who still stood red-eyed. The older Pandav said, let him go, Arjun. You have proved your point. And who would kill a man that needs a woman's protection? Arjun scowled at Angrapran as if he would dearly prefer to kill him. He released the elf's hair, and the Gandharva fell back on the grass. He gave a long moan and slowly stood up. He was taller than Bhim. Now he bowed low, with folded hands to Yudhishthir and Arjun. With a rueful smile, Angrapran said, I renounce my name. I am humbled, and my chariot is ashes. He laughed. It seemed merriment was so much part of his nature that not the shame of defeat could stifle it. Impulsively, Angrapran took Arjun's hand and cried, I must repay your kindness. I would have killed you, but you spared my life when you could have had just revenge. I will give you the secret power of the Gandharvas. The Chakshushi is mine to give. Before Arjun could protest, the Gandharva placed his fingertips on the Pandav's temples and whispered a mantra in his ear. Arjun's body began to tingle with the most extraordinary sensation. Angrapran was saying, the Chakshushi sets the Gandharvas apart from you humans. Liquid sight was upon Arjun, as if a hidden eye had opened inside his head at the Gandharv's mantra. A fabulous, mystic eye. Visions swept the Pandav prince, and all his rage of a moment ago melted away. A beatific smile lit his face. Angrapran said, now you can see into all the worlds, Kshatriya, and whatever you like on any of them. Arjun's eyes were alight at what he saw. Then, remembering himself, he willed the uncanny visions to stop, and to his surprise, they did. Arjun looked at the tall being before him in some awe. The Gandharv had already flashed on to his next concern. I also want, O Kshatriya, to give you and your brothers 100 horses, steeds like mine, foaled in the homelands of the Gandharvs. They appear at the very thought of he who owns them, and so do they change their color or their speed. Look. Next moment, a herd of wild horses stood on the banks of the river. They were like no horses of the earth, shimmering and of many colors. The Pandavas stood enraptured as their new-found friend said, my horses are lean, Kshatriyas, but they never tire, and they run as swift as thoughts. Arjun thought this had gone far enough. I cannot accept your gifts, wonderful though they are. I have nothing to give you in return. Angrapran bowed solemnly again. To meet a great man is always a joyful thing. Besides, you have given me an inestimable gift, my life. Yet, if you want to repay me for what I gave you, teach me the secret of the astra that made my chariot ashes. So be it, laughed the Pandav. I will teach you the secret of the astra and take your chakshushi and your horses. Arjun taught the Gandharv the mantra for the Agnyastra, and the immortal shone to receive it. In return, the Pandav took the horses fleeter than the wind. The two of them embraced, crying, may our friendship last forever. Then curious Arjun said, tell me, friend, why did you attack us? We are Kshatriya princes, not thieves or brigands. The elf was solemn, unannounced, without care for proper time or right. You wander these forests. You do not know where you should venture, at what hour. My women were with me. I was honor bound to attack. But tell me, friend, in truth, who are you? Yudhishthir replied, we are the Pandavas, hiding from our enemies. Angrapran gave a long whistle, melodious as a bird call. He embraced each of the princes again and bowed deeply before Kunti. I am glad. I am exceedingly glad you are alive. One day you five will rule the world. It is not right that you roam the wild without a priest to guide you. Kings and princes must have priests. Tapastyas, no, no kshatriya or can conquer the earth without a Brahman beside him. Arjun said, "We are Pandavas and Kauntyas. All right. But why do you call us Tapastyas?" Once, with the help of his guru, the Brahm Rishi Vashishta, the ancient king Samvaran, regained the kingdom he had lost. With that Muni's help, also Samvaran won the hand of his beloved Surya's daughter Tapti. In time, Samvaran and Tapti had a son. They named him Kuru, and he was your ancestor. And so I call you the Patyas. Arjun said, "For the time being, let your beautiful horses remain with you. I will take them when my brother is a king. Now, wise friend, tell us if you know a Brahman who will be our priest." A rishi who does tapasya in this very forest. He is a Deval Muni's younger brother called Dhaumya, and his ashram is yonder. He pointed deeper into the jungle. After their piquant encounter, the Pandavas and Kunti bid the Gandharva farewell and went the way he pointed in search of a priest. Dhaumya's ashram was a simple and austere dwelling next to a jungle shrine called Utkochak. He was a serene Muni, tall, spare, and bearded, and his eyes shone with wisdom. The princes prostrated themselves at his feet. When he had blessed them, he made the Pandavas and Kunti sit comfortably on seats of darab grass, fed them sweet fruit and some soft and delicious roots. Already uncommon empathy sprang deeply between them. Dhaumya said, "Tell me, Brahmins, if Brahmins you are, who you are, and why have you sought me out in this jungle where no man ventures?" Yudhishthir replied, "Muni, we are the Pandavas of Hastinapur, whom the world believes dead. We have come to you because we want a priest and a guru. For one day we hope to return to our father's city and rule the world from there." Dhaumya smiled and grew very quiet. Finally, he asked, "And where are you heading now?" "To Kampilya." This seemed to satisfy him. "If you truly want me to be your priest, I am willing." Suddenly, they had a strong sense that the darkness that had shrouded their lives for 2 years had lifted away. Dhaumya did not take long to collect his spare possessions. By the light of a new dawn, they set out together for Campania. The spinning fish. Chapter number 48. After some days of walking through jungles full of exotic birds and beasts, tangled valleys full of flowers, and past lakes brimming with lotuses and swans, they arrived in southern Panchal, Drupad's kingdom, and a day later in Campilya, that king's capital. Inside the city, preparations were in full swing for the Princess Draupadi's swambar. The Pandavas found a friendly carpenter who was willing to take in 5 Brahmins and their regal looking mother, and they began living in a room he gave them. As in Ek Chakra, the princes still lived off alms. Like any mendicants, they went begging each morning and returned by midday with the food they gathered. Kunti divided what they brought among her sons. As they roamed the thronging streets of Campilya, the princes heard from the people. Drupad has no doubt the Pandavas are alive. The rishis have told him Draupadi will be Arjun's wife. The king has a mighty bow that few men can even lift. A wooden fish hung 100 hands in the air is the target. The fish spins at great speed, and only the archer who brings it down with an arrow will win Draupadi's hand. The archers may not aim directly at the fish, only at its reflection in a trough of water. Drupad is sure only Arjun can shoot the fish. A man who is meant to be dead, we can hardly wait for the day. The Pandavas and Arjun himself would go quietly among the people listening to all this. The princes too waited impatiently for the day of the Swambar. Meanwhile, Kshatriyas from all over Bharatvarsh had arrived in Campilya. They came from kingdoms far and near to try their luck with the bow and the spinning fish. Besides, Drupad's hospitality was legendary. Even before the Pandavas, the Kauravas had come to Campilya with Duryodhan and Karan. The Yadavs, the Bhojs, Vrishnis, and Andhaks had arrived in the city, heroic Kshatriyas all. Among the Yadavs was dark Krishna of Mathura, Vishnu's avatar, whose life was to become inextricably involved with the Pandavs' lives. They were destined to become his warriors of light one day, most of all Arjun. At last, the momentous day dawned, bright and clear, birds singing in the trees, and all Campilya was up with the sun. The arena of the Swayamvar was an unforgettable spectacle. Every seat was taken. Brahmins and rishis sat in their enclosures. The common people had thronged in thousands into the immense stadium. Gaudily attired, as was their way, garlands round their necks, perfume in their clothes, and on their skins, excited beyond measure. The finest sight was the enclosure of the Kshatriyas who had come to vie for Draupadi's hand. It was filled with the noblest warriors in Bharatvarsh, each a lion, everyone a rival today. They say the devas of heaven had gathered in the sky in invisible vimans and peered down to watch Draupadi's Swayamvar. Five Kshatriyas, disguised as Brahmins, their faces covered by heavy beards and masked with ashes, their hair matted in jata, also found their way into the arena. They mingled with the other Brahmins and were careful not to enter or sit together. Deep sea conches sounded, calling the feverish crowd to be silent. Drum rolls rose and faded and rose again as the crowd fell hushed and all eyes were riveted to the arched entrance from the palace. For a moment, everyone in that stadium was breathless for the Princess Draupadi's arrival. Then her brother Drishtdyuman led her in. She wore resonant red silk, golden ornaments, and flashing jewels. All these paled before her dark, mysterious beauty. A sigh rose from the crowd when she walked in. She was beyond doubt the most beautiful woman in the world. She was more, she was unearthly. Yet there was something fateful about her as well, something frightening. Beauty like hers did not belong in this world. The Pandavs' wildest fantasies, which had their way with them, since the traveling Muni told them about her, did Draupadi no justice. She was lovelier than all their imaginings, like everyone else in the arena. Pandu's sons sat like infatuated boys, their eyes never leaving her face. The crowd had fallen silent in awe of the dark princess. You heard only the drone of the priests chanting mantras as they poured libation over the ritual fire. At the heart of the arena was a dais, and now Drishtadyuman climbed in onto this platform. The fire-born prince's voice was muted thunder as he announced, "We have come together for my sister Draupadi's Swayamvar. Here is a bow, and here are 5 arrows. Above me is a Matsya yantra, just visible through the opening in the screen below it. At my feet is the vessel of water in which the archers must aim at the spinning fish's reflection. My father, King Drupad, has said that he who brings down the fish shall have my sister's hand." Drishtadyuman turned to Draupadi now and named the kings and the warriors who had come to try to win her. Duryodhan, prince of the Kurus, among his brothers, Karan, king of Ang, Duryodhan's dearest friend, now said to be the best archer in the world, Drona's son Ashwathama, and Duryodhan's uncle Shakuni. One by one, Drishtyuman pointed out the great Kshatriyas, Jarasandh, Shalya, Bhagdat. Draupadi hardly looked at them because her eyes always sought another face in the crowd. Balram of the Vrishnis, and beside him Devaki's son Krishna, who the YSA is the avatar. Draupadi bowed slightly to dark Krishna, who smiled back at her. His eyes were so different from all the others, so knowing and friendly. Krishna would take no part in the test of archery, said Drishdyuman, nor his brother Balram or any of the other Yadavs. He passed on to Jayadrath, king of the Sindhus, then to Shishupal, lord of the Chedis, and on to the rest. There was a reason why Krishna would not compete for Draupadi's hand. In his immaculate heart, he knew why this ravishing princess had been born into the world, to be his own agent to help catalyze what he himself had come for. To rid the earth of her burden, the arrogant sway of the Kshatriya. This was the very end of the Dwapar Yuga, and it was written that the next stage, the Kali Yuga, would be ruled by the Shudra. Mysterious are the ways of time. He, the dark deliverer, would become the bane of the Kshatriyas, who must not survive to dominate the coming and lesser age. Krishna had come to end a yuga. Moreover, knowing all things, he knew the Pandavas were not dead. His eyes also roved the swollen crowd in search of his cousins, who would become his soldiers in his war against evil. Though Kunti was his first Vasudev's sister, his father Vasudeva's sisters, Krishna had never seen the Pandavas before. He had no doubt that as soon as he did, he would know them, even in a crowd like this one. While every other gaze in the arena was peeled to the stunning Draupadi, Krishna arranged the jostling tears for the sons of Pandu. Meanwhile, Drishtadhyuman invited the first Kshatriya archer to try to bring down the fish. The great bow had come into the house of the Panchal in times out of mind, days when gods moved openly in the world and Kshatriyas were hardly less than devas. It was the Kindhur and it had not been fashioned on earth. Only the most exceptional archer of this dwindled time could hope to even lift that bow, let alone string it and shoot with it. The Kindhur's bowstring sparkled as if it was made with thousands of minute diamonds. At the first archer mounted the dais, Draupadi and her twin climbed down and stood a small way off. This prince was a handsome young Kshatriya. He was the first aspirant, and the crowd cheered him loudly. Grinning, Yuyutsu, whom Duryodhan had sent to test the bow, strutted briefly on the dais, his body glowing with the oil with which he had rubbed himself. Raising his arms for silence, he said a brief prayer. His eyes strayed helplessly to the bewitching Draupadi. Yuyutsu bent quickly, clasped both his hands around the bow. Krishna by then spotted 5 Brahmins, whose eyes never left Draupadi, not even to glance at Yuyutsu, as if they focused on an archer's target. He pointed them out to his brother Balram, whispering, "Look, they are here," like live embers covered in Brahman's ashes. Poor Yuyutsu was having a hard time. The muscles stood out on his arms and his back, beads of sweat on his face. The bow would not budge. At last, with a cry of frustration, he gave up and stood panting, a rueful smile and a wave at the crowd. And Yuyutsu climbed down. The crowd cheered him for his effort, and the other kings for his failure. Draupadi's eyes shone with satisfaction. Krishna watched his Pandav's cousins. Each of them sighed in relief that the bow was truly such an awesome one. The avatar smiled to himself. Only he knew something of the long, hard way that lay ahead of that supernaturally beautiful princess and her suitors. The next Kshatriya approached the platform. The common folk of Campilya snickered among themselves. The mighty Kindhur would easily resist this mawkish prince, who was far too young anyway. Surely enough, after a valiant effort, he also failed to lift the bow from its pedestal and returned rather shamefaced to his place. But the crowd cheered him anyway, one spark crying, "Come back next year, son." But not all the warriors in that Swayamvar were as easily frustrated by the Kindhur. There were many tremendous Kshatriyas among them. Shishupal was the first. He was Krishna's cousin and the Pandavas as well. He was a pale man, a giant, known as the Bull of Chedi. A hush fell over the arena. Shishupal rose from his place, his head clean shaven and gleaming in the sun, and his eyes shone as well. If any Kshatriya so far seemed capable of lifting the bow, stringing it, and perhaps even bringing down the spinning fish, it was this bull-like man. For a long moment, Shishupal stood very still on the dais, breathing deeply and his eyes shut. Then he bowed to Draupadi and with a smile on his haughty face, picked up the kindur quite easily. The crowd moaned. With no effort, Shishupal pulled the glittering bowstring, taut, and secured it. The silence deepened on the crowd. Anyone who looked closely would have seen that Draupadi's hands shook. Shishupal picked up his first arrow, and the princess was as tense as his bowstring. The king of Chedi drew the string to his ear and, taking aim in the silver trough at his feet, shot his first arrow at the fish. He missed by the width of a sesame seed. Only Krishna saw Draupadi visibly relax, and then she was tense again because Shishupal picked up his next arrow. Again, he missed so narrowly. He took the crowd's breath away, but when he shot his second arrow, the bow came alive and with a crack like thunder flung the archer down. The crowd roared. Groggily, Shishupal rose to his feet. The Kindur had drained him. He staggered towards the bow, but now he could not lift it. He bowed quickly to the crowd and, hanging his head, walked back to his place. Draupadi's eyes were alight, as if her life had been spared. Next came Jarasandh of Magad, powerful king and a Krishna's inveterate enemy. He too picked up the bow with no effort and peering into the silver vessel, shot four arrows at the fish, while Draupadi held her breath as if the shafts were aimed at her heart. She was praying. She had never set eyes on Arjun, about whom she had heard so much from her father, and she was praying that only he would bring down the fish. Now, in fierce reality, Jarasandh missed the spinning thing four times by no more than a breath of a mustard seed. Each time Draupadi felt her heart stop beating, and every arrow took a lifetime to travel between Jarasandh's brutal hands and the target. She felt she lived and died four times. Drishtadyuman touched her shoulder and whispered, "It is twice as hard to bring down the fish as it is to string the bow." Jarasandh could not shoot the fifth arrow, and Draupadi heaved another sigh. Duryodhan rose next, and his was a potent and sinister presence. Draupadi shivered to look at him. His hooded eyes raked her. She felt alone and vulnerable, as if he stripped her naked with those dreadful eyes. Duryodhan also strung the bow effortlessly. The people of Campilia were terrified lest this devil win their princess. Drishtadyuman, who knew what a monster Dhritarashtra's son was, quailed at the thought of his sister married to him. Duryodhan picked up his first arrow and sent it humming at the fish. The world stood still. Then the very crowd sighed. The evil prince had missed. He missed again, and twice more. He shook with rage, as if the contest had been contrived just to humiliate him. Duryodhan's last arrow missed the fish by the breadth of the little finger on a man's hand. With a tigerish growl, he let the bow fall. He bowed stiffly to the crowd, but no one clapped. Well aware of the ominous effect he had, he turned to Draupadi and smiled blandly at her. She looked away, seething. Duryodhan stalked back to his seat. This princess had touched his malignant heart as no other woman ever. Night after night, he would dream of her face and her dark body, as he saw it now, naked in his mind's eye. Krishna missed none of this, and he knew the conclusion to which it would lead one day. Today was only the sowing of a seed. When it was grown, the plant of hatred which sprang from that seed would choke all Kshatriya kind and have the heads of countless kings for its fruit. Now Karan of Ang rose from his place beside Duryodhan, and the Kuru camp erupted in wild cheering. This was the man Draupadi and Drupad feared the most. He was lithe and sleek, a warrior of presence and power, said after the burning of the house of Lakh to be unquestionably the best bowman on earth. His tread was soft, his quietness resoundingly assured as he approached the dais like a hunting tiger. The golden armor he had been born with, which was part of his very skin, shone dully beneath his pale silk hair shirt. The crowd fell quiet. Karan did not so much as glance at Draupadi, and her blood ran cold. Unlike all the others, he did not mount the platform straight away. Truly like a stalking feline, he walked round the stage, studying the spinning fish from every side and angle. Five princes disguised as Brahmins shivered as they watched Karan. Sweat broke out on their bodies. They knew he was the one who could find the target. Karan's concentration was elemental. Even Blue Krishna was tense, looking on with anxiety in his eyes. The avatar knew this archer was the only real danger. Leisurely, Karan padded around the bow, the water, and the fish many times, unraveling the riddle of the revolving target. At last, he seemed satisfied, and a smile touched his lips. Now he gave Draupadi a searing look, as if she were already his. She knew this was not just arrogance, but the confidence of an immaculate archer. She felt as if a demon had embraced her. Karan climbed the dais and paused at the foot of the bow. He turned his face to the sky, where the sun was at his zenith. That warrior seemed to pray. Then a light touched his graceful body, and he picked up the kindur in his left hand. Drishtadyuman and Draupadi stood at the foot of the dais, not 5 paces from Karan as he fitted the first arrow to the string. Draupadi's heart was in her mouth. As he began to draw the bowstring to his ear, he bent to peer into the water at his feet. Above him, the fish glittered strangely now and seemed brighter than ever, as if the sun lit it up for this archer. It even seemed the fish did not spin any more, but hung still, grown big as a whale, so a child could shoot it. Draupadi felt as if someone was choking her. She was certain Karan would bring the fish down. She wanted to scream, to flee. The string was drawn back now, the arrow aimed at the fish's eye. Draupadi heard a voice from the crowd. Perhaps it was the blue Yadav's voice, but she could not be sure. Everything was a whirl. Her life spun around with the wretched fish. The voice was saying inside her head, how can a princess like you marry a Sudputra? A moment before Karan shot his arrow, Draupadi cried to Drishtaman, I will not marry a Sud. Karan lurched as if someone had struck him. Still his arrow shaved the fish. Now his poise was shattered, and he flashed Draupadi a look of untold hatred. His hand shook, and his assurance was in shreds. A murmur hummed through the crowd when Karan missed his mark. The people had been sure he would strike the target. Only Drishdyuman and Karan heard what Draupadi said. Karan found the bow in his hands had gone intolerably heavy. It was all he could manage to shoot the next 4 arrows. But he had no hope of finding his mark. The Pandavas breathed again. So did Dark Krishna, who a moment earlier had his eyes shut and seemed to Balram to have been plunged in dhyan, as if he was sending his very thoughts out to someone. Karan climbed down, burning with the insult. Kuru voices were raised in anger. This target is impossible. We have been brought here to be made fools of. If Karan can't shoot the fish, no archer on earth can. The kings who had not yet tried the bow now refused to mount the deers. Silence fell on the arena. What would become of Draupadi? Drupad could not hold another Swambur with honor, nor could he make the archer's test simpler. Would Draupadi remain unmarried and a virgin, such beauty wasted? Then, like a flame from ashes, Arjun stood up in the enclosure of the Brahmins. Krishna nudged Balram. Arjun began to walk towards the dais. A murmur rose among the Balram elders. This is madness. The best Kshatriyas in Bharatvarsha have failed to shoot the fish. And this Brahman stripling dares approach the bow. He will bring ridicule on us all. Stop him. To some others, The Brahman youth, his hair tangled in wild strands of jata, his face covered entirely in a thick beard and white ash, seemed radiant and strong. They cried, "He looks determined. Let him have his chance. There is no shame in failing here. Not even Karan of Ang has succeeded. He seems a poised young man. He seems powerful. Let him try. He may cover us all in glory." The elders saw there was little to be lost and everything to gain. Sensing uncommon strength in the dark Brahman, they now said, "Let him have a turn, if it is allowed." Arjun walked up to Drishtaman and said quietly, "It seems the target is beyond the Kshatriyas here. Is a Brahman allowed to shoot at the Matsya Yantra?" The Kshatriyas squirmed. Though not for a moment did anyone imagine the young Brahman could bring down the spinning fish when the likes of Jarasandh and Karan had failed. Some Kaurav princes cried mockingly, "Let the fool try. He doesn't know what a great bow this is. Let him lift it first." Drishtadyumna raised his hand for silence. He said to Arjun, "A Brahman may certainly try to shoot the target. Anyone may try, be he a Brahman, a Kshatriya, a Vaishya, or even a Shudra. And you have my word. The man who brings down the fish will have my sister for his wife." Of course, the reason for this was that Drupad had no idea in what guise Arjun will come to the Swambar. Arjun bowed to Drishtaman. He turned to Draupadi and bowed to her. Suddenly she felt pierced as sweetly by a shaft of love. She felt all her panic that one of the Kshatriyas may actually succeed melt away when she looked into this young man's eyes. Draupadi felt fate move in her in a tide. She felt they already belonged to the Brahman. She began to pray that whoever he was, he should not miss the fish. She did not care anymore if Arjun came to claim her. All she knew was that she had been born for this dark Brahman. More graceful than Karan, Arjun mounted the platform. He made a pradakshina, walking around the Kindhar, the only one so far to do this. He folded his hands to the Ayudh. The crowd's amazement, the young Brahman prostrated before it as if he was worshipping his destiny. Krishna leaned forward, his hand tight on Balram's arm. Draupadi's heart fluttered madly again, but now every beat a prayer that the Brahman would not fail. Even Drishdyuman found himself hoping inexplicably that the dark youth would succeed. Arjun rose again. He stepped up to the bow and lifted it. He strung it, and still he was completely calm. Some rowdy Kshatriyas who had been drinking in the morning had clapped and booed when Arjun prostrated himself. They fell silent at the ease with which he picked up the bow and strung it. And the silence turned deafening when hardly pausing to aim in the water, the young Brahman shot the 5 silver arrows in a blur, the shafts flashing up, one after the other, all in a single moment. The fish fell, pierced along its length by 5 arrows. Into perfect silence fell a fragrant rain of barely tangible flowers. From Devlok, there was a subtle music in the sky. Only Krishna heard it or saw the fine petal shower for the commotion that erupted in the stadium, especially from the frenzied Brahmins. Drupad on his throne saw what had happened. He heard the deep bass of conches, the thunder of the drums of Panchal, as Draupadi, graceful as a black swan on water, glided up to Arjun and draped her garland around his neck. The crowd began to sing and dance as the Pandav took his bride's hand, came down the platform steps. They were like Indra and Shochi, like Agni and Swaha, Vishnu and Lakshmi, Surya and Usha, like Kam and Rati, Shiv and Uma, like Ram and Sita, Nal and Damayanti. Drupad was excited, but he was not sure the young Brahman was Arjun. Though he was brilliant, all right, and a better archer than Karan today, Drishdyuman did not know who the young stranger was. As for Draupadi, she did not care. Whoever he was, from now he was the lord of her heart and her life. We don't feel like stopping, but the clock says we should stop here. So, Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaye Purnameva Vishishyate. Om Shanti 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 Om. Thank you very much.